Down. Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I give my thanks to you and to Mr Speaker for granting me this urgent debate on child sexual exploitation in Keighley and across the Bradford district. Madam Deputy Speaker, child sexual exploitation is apparent, but I'm afraid this issue is being swept under the carpet. Local government leaders and people in positions of influence have a duty of care to protect the most vulnerable in society, our young children, women and girls. People need to open their eyes to this issue. We know that young children remain at risk. It is about time that we tackle these horrific, vile and criminal activities once and for all. In my mind, it is absolutely vital that in order to move forward, we must call this issue out for what it is. Hold those authorities who have failed our communities for far too long to account. Grasp the scale of the problem and understand the complexities of this issue, the hierarchy, the methodology and the chain of command which sits behind these darkest and most vile acts, and get to grips on how and why communities like the one which I proudly represent in Keighley have been allowed, under the watch of so many, to be haunted by gang-related child sexual exploitation for far too long. Because if we do not address these issues, these points, properly, openly, and with a real willingness to deal with this issue, then those at the centre of all of this, our young children, will continue to be let down, continue to be targeted, continue to be exploited and sexually abused by the worst individuals our society knows. It has now been over 20 years since the former Member of Parliament for Keighley, Anne Cryer, first very publicly raised her concerns about grooming gangs and child sexual exploitation within the Pakistani community in my constituency of Keighley. Anne deserves enormous credit for her work talking about this very difficult subject. But I'm afraid to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that in this time nothing really has changed. No real progress has been made in dealing with this issue across Keighley and the wider Bradford district. I'm incredibly conscious of just how delicate this subject is, but we should not be frightened of talking about it. My view is that unless we talk openly, we are failing. So let's call this problem out for what it is. Predominantly, a small minority of largely Pakistani Muslim men in West Yorkshire, including, I am sad to say, in Keighley and across the Bradford district, that have been sexually exploiting young children for far too long. And the Pakistani community are quite rightly outraged that the entire community is being branded with the same accusation. It is not fair and it is deeply offensive. I will give way.
Thank you. I thank my friend for giving way. He's making a very powerful speech and rightly shining a light on, frankly, an absolute abdication of responsibility by the authorities in his constituency. Would he agree with me that if this government is serious about tackling male sexual violence against women and girls, it is absolutely imperative that we tackle cultural practices where we find them?
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I absolutely agree, Madam Deputy Speaker, with the points that have been so eloquently made. Let's be absolutely clear that I have had to bring this debate to this chamber because I, as a representative of Keighley in the Bradford district, are experiencing those points. Failure by our local council, failure by our new West Yorkshire Mayor, who is lucky enough to be in a new position in charge of West Yorkshire Police, tackling these issues head on.
I will give way.
I thank him for giving way. I know that this was
first brought to light in Rotherham. But at that time, many of those organisations, like the police and the council, felt that maybe they were becoming sort of racist by tackling it because it was involving one particular community. Is that still a problem, or has that been cleared up?
I thank my honourable friend's intervention, and I absolutely agree that we have to be... This is a very, very delicate subject. I am acutely conscious of that. And I must admit, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I am nervous about talking about it, but we have to address these issues. Every community is very different across this country, and my community is no different in that makeup. But we have to look at that common denominator factor. And I want to be very clear, Madam Deputy Speaker. This isn't about race or pitching communities against each other. It's about looking at the facts so that we can address them head-on and move forward. I will give way.
I'm very grateful to my parliamentary neighbour and good friend, and I want to commend him for bringing forward this debate and for all the work he's doing locally to shine a light on this particular issue. Would he agree with me that this is really just about the victims and making sure that A, they get the justice that they deserve, and B, that we make sure that there are no future victims of this terrible crime? And so, would he agree with me that if Bradford Council and the authorities there won't actually bring forward an inquiry, which is much needed, partly because presumably it will expose huge amounts of wrongdoing on their part, that if they won't do it, that the government should make sure that we get this inquiry so that we can get to the bottom of what's gone wrong and make sure it never ever happens again?
Well, I thank my honourable friend, my neighbour, for making those points, because firstly, we must never forget who is at the centre of this debate, who is experiencing these horrific, vile acts. And I will come on to some of the alarming, horrific cases that have been experienced by many young girls across my constituency and the wider Bradford district. But we need to be absolutely clear that local leaders, our Bradford Council, our new West Yorkshire Mayor, should be using their position to call this issue out for what it is, be clear about taking these issues forward, be wanting to get behind resolving these issues. And my view is very clear that we need a Rotherham-style inquiry to address these issues. And just finally, the point that you make about influence from a national level going down to local leaders. Well, I very much hope to be using this opportunity in this debate to be encouraging the government to use its weight to put pressure on Bradford Council, our new West Yorkshire Mayor, to do the right thing.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I thank him for bringing this subject into this chamber. It's very, very important. But will he agree with me that the only way that we know the full scale of these vile crimes in Bradford is for a full Rotherham-type review, investigation? And would he also agree with me that certain local politicians on the council and the mayor should hang their heads in shame?
Well, I think my honourable friend makes a very valid point, that we absolutely need to understand, Madam Deputy Speaker, the scale of the issue across the Bradford district. And I will come on to that point later in my speech, because only this summer, in July, a light, limited, 50-page review was released, and Bradford Council, our new West Yorkshire Mayor, feels that this is acceptable. We need a full Rotherham-style inquiry to look at this issue so we can get real learnings going forward and provide reassurance to victims to go forward. Thank you.
Right. Can I just congratulate him on being so brave as to bring this forward with such passion and such force? May I suggest to him that he works closely with the Honourable Lady for Rotherham, who has been a huge support to me in tackling these issues, because local councils do not want to have inquiries. My local council opposed an inquiry very vigorously, and when eventually we succeeded, with great help from the then Home Secretary, they now have ambushed the inquiry by deluging it with 1 million documents. And so 4 years on, my victims in my constituency who came to me for a solution have not had their inquiry. So may I urge him to go for the Rotherham-style inquiry. It was effective, it delivered what it needed to do, which was justice for victims. So may I ask him to please do that.
Well, and again, I thank my honourable friend for her very kind intervention, and I wholeheartedly agree with the points that you are making. And you very kindly made reference to my honourable friend, if I may say so, for Rotherham, who, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think this is one of the most important debates that we have to be having in this House. And look at the other side. This is the only member that has turned up to this debate. And I think that shows volumes. And I thank you very much for coming along. It is exceptionally kind. And I totally feel that, yes, we must have a full Rotherham-style inquiry to get to the grips of this issue. Because I certainly do not want this to continue to be swept under the carpet. Madam Deputy Speaker, I wanted to very much make the point that this is not about race or pitching communities against each other. It's about looking at the facts so that we can address them and move forward. And of course, it is about looking at that common denominator. And I just want to make the point that this is no different if you are identifying other common denominators when looking at child sexual exploitation, such as we've seen inquiries on similar subjects regarding the Catholic Church, for example. But the reality is, you must understand the complexities that relate to a community so you can move forward. The consequences of not acting are extremely serious. If we tiptoe around the edges or fail to talk openly about these challenges, we are failing both the victims and the Pakistani community. These victims, mainly young girls, are having their lives ruined at a young age by this vile and disgusting sexual abuse. And this has all been done whilst authorities, including Bradford Council and West Yorkshire Police, have turned a blind eye and failed to take action year after year after year.
Will you give way again?
I will give way to my own views.
It's very generous. Is it not the case that many of these girls will either be in the care of the local authorities, looked after children, or indeed come from families where social workers are closely engaging with those particular families?
Well, you absolutely make a very worrying and accurate intervention, because that is absolutely the case. Most of these young girls that we are talking about, and I will come on to this later in the speech, are the very girls that are in protected care, that are in care of these authorities that should be looking after these young girls. And yes, I will give way.
Thank you. I thank my honourable friend for letting me intervene. A mark of a good society is how we protect our most vulnerable. And I trained as a social worker in Liverpool in 2000. And anecdotally, we knew this was going on. Institutional cover-ups was going on because people were too afraid to do anything. And I urge my honourable friend to go forth and continue with this, because I know he will get repercussions personally for this. And I'm fully behind him.
And again, I thank my honourable friend for her kind intervention. Madam Deputy Speaker, we all are elected representatives to do the very, very best for our community, to call out the difference between what is right and what is wrong. This is not a political issue. This is doing the right thing to stand up for our communities. Now, this summer, a limited review focusing on just 5 children who had been sexually abused over the last 20 years in the Bradford district was published. It makes horrifying reading. Let me tell you about Anna, not her real name, who is mentioned in this review. She was repeatedly sexually abused by gangs of men whilst in care. The review said that when she was 15, she had an Islamic marriage with her abuser, and her social worker attended the ceremony. Or Ruby, not her real name. She had a disrupted childhood, which included the death of her mother when she was a very young child. Ruby was identified as being at risk from child sexual abuse at the age of 13, and throughout her childhood experienced 14 different placements in looked after care. She was sexually abused, and this report identifies that childcare services in Bradford did not keep her safe. This review This limited review, published in the summer, is only a 50-page document and, in my mind, only reflects the tip of the iceberg of what has been going on across the Bradford district. In 2016, a group of 12 men who committed serious sexual offences against 2 young girls from Keighley and Bradford were jailed for a collective 132 years. One of those girls was raped by 5 men in succession. Live cases involving grooming gangs are still working their way through the courts. Only last October, 21 men from Keighley and Bradford were arrested from being linked to offences that are allegedly occurred against a young female girl between 2001 and 2009. Decisive action is needed if we are to deal with this issue, and that is why we need a full, independent, Rotherham-style inquiry into child sexual exploitation in Keighley and the wider Bradford district.
Will you give way?
I will give way. Yeah.
I'm very grateful. He's absolutely right, and I commend him for everything he's saying. Isn't it shocking that the leader of Bradford Council, Susan Hinchcliffe, has said that we shouldn't have a Rotherham-style inquiry in Bradford because it won't find anything new? Isn't that shocking complacency on the part of the leader of Bradford Council? And isn't it the case that if the council's got nothing to hide and doesn't fear anything happening, it's got nothing to fear from this kind of inquiry, and then we can all know once and for all exactly what's happened, so we can all satisfy ourselves that there's nothing to hide and that we can make sure nothing like this ever happens again? Isn't her attitude terrible and complacent and show a complete disregard for the victims?
Again, and I thank my honourable friend, my neighbour, for his kind intervention, and he very eloquently makes a crucial point here. The leader of Bradford Council is in a very unique position to be able to trigger a Rotherham-style inquiry, and I don't understand what the council or what others, like our new West Yorkshire Mayor, have to fear from being more open, more transparent, wanting to move this forward for the best interests of victims across both of our constituencies and the wider Bradford district. So how do we get there? How do we instigate a full Rotherham-style inquiry? As happened in Rotherham, Bradford Council have the ability and should appoint an independent chair, like Professor Alexis Jay, to conduct an independent inquiry into their and associated agencies' handling of child sexual exploitation over the last 20 years. We need to learn lessons locally, to find out what has been going wrong with institutions like Bradford Council, West Yorkshire Police and Bradford's Child Protection Services. And believe me, Madam Deputy Speaker, they need addressing. Bradford's Children's Services Department is in a state of chaos. In 2018, it was rated by Ofsted as inadequate, needing severe improvement. Only this summer, the government had to step in and put a commissioner to be in charge of Bradford Council services and look at it. And again, only this week, a further Ofsted report has been released, being incredibly damning, and that no improvement is taking place at a sufficient enough pace. I will give way.
Isn't it rather telling that with all these failings of children's services at Bradford Council, that the leader of the council never takes responsibility for these themselves, and we just have a merry-go-round of children's services directors being fired and hired, and yet the people at the top of the council never actually accept responsibility for the failings on their watch?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Leaders of any organisation have a responsibility to do the right thing. And it is unfortunate that Bradford Council's Children's Services have been under the watch of not only the current leader of Bradford Council, but also the same chief executive that has resided over those children's services since 2015 And yet here we are in 2021 with the government having to step in and do the right thing. In August, as I said, a damning report was produced. And that is why Bradford Council need to stop sweeping this issue under the carpet and launch a full, independent, Rotherham-style inquiry. And I will settle for nothing less, Madam Deputy Speaker. As Anna, one of the victims I talked about earlier, said, what victims need is a full inquiry. If Rotherham had one, then why are we denying the thousands of children here in Bradford one? I have received endless pieces of correspondence asking why so little has been done to tackle child sexual exploitation over the past 20+ years across the Bradford district. Since I was elected less than 2 years ago, I have raised this issue repeatedly, both at a local level and here in this House, and I am raising it again today, and I will continue to raise this issue. Madam Deputy Speaker, I will not let this issue drop. I was even told that by doing so, I was stoking up racial tensions. But Madam Deputy Speaker, that is the very nub of this issue. It is not being dealt with. This has got nothing to do with stoking up racial tensions. It is about the difference between right and wrong, and fundamentally is about protecting young children. Those in positions of responsibility need to have the guts to take action. Too many people in positions of responsibility have ducked this issue for decades. Take my predecessor, John Grogan, who said, and I quote, an inquiry would not be in the best interests of young people. Our new West Yorkshire Mayor, Tracy Brabin, the former member for Batley and Spen, who is now in charge of policing in West Yorkshire. She is now in the perfect position to show leadership and to tackle this issue once and for all.
Would Honourable Friend give way, please?
I will give way.
I thank my Honourable Friend for giving way. It's very generous for this time. Does he agree with me that once this inquiry takes place and we get to the bottom of this and these grooming gangs are put away where they rightly belong in prison, then the next call will be these lazy politicians and they need locking up too?
I thank my honourable friend's intervention, and I sincerely agree with his frustration that local leaders are not taking this seriously. But the person that our new West Yorkshire Mayor has put in charge of policing says that this is not a Bradford problem. But let's look across this House. Do most members represent communities where their local council has missed clear signs of child sexual exploitation? Do most members represent communities where their local children's services department has just been taken over by the government stepping in and putting a commissioner in charge and had 2 consecutively very damning Ofsted reports? Do most members represent communities where children remain unprotected and children remain and continue to be sexually exploited? No, they don't. Bradford district is haunted by these problems and we need to tackle them head on. This issue has gone on for many, many years. And of course, administrations at Bradford Council have changed. MPs have changed. But those in positions of responsibility now need to take action. It is my view. In my view, it is shocking that in responding to calls for a full, independent, Rotherham-style inquiry, the leader of Bradford Council, Susan Hinchcliffe, said an inquiry would not be of additional value and that she has personally been hurt by my comments. But this is not personal. This is about calling on those who have a responsibility to do the right thing. If we continue in limbo and fail to take action, the very worst of humanity will exploit this issue for their own gain. And of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, this very sadly happened in my constituency in 2005, where the BNP made Keighley their #1 target seat as in the parliamentary election. They came into our town, bombarded it with leaflets and rallies, and inflamed racial tensions. We need to think about the victims in all of this, those who have been let down by the very organisations who have been there to protect them and should have been there to protect them. Simply for Bradford Council, the police, our new West Yorkshire Mayor, to simply hang their hat on a limited 50-page review that only looked at 5 children who had experienced these horrendous events is weak. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, we must absolutely never forget who is at the heart of these conversations. The children, the young victims that have been for years let down by the very organisations that are there to protect them. And we all, in positions of responsibility, have a duty to do the right thing. So in concluding, Madam Deputy Speaker, here are the facts. Child sexual exploitation is sadly a big problem in Keighley and the Bradford district. It has been for many years. It is abhorrent and a disgusting, vile issue. It needs addressing, especially in the light of the limited review that has taken place and published earlier this year, which actually leaves more questions, far more questions, than it gives answers. Local leaders must stop sweeping this issue under the carpet and tackle it head on. They must open their eyes. I will not let this drop. We need an independent Rotherham-style inquiry so we can look at what has gone wrong in the past, make sure that these vile abuses come to an end. And we need to reinstall trust back into these authorities by the victims, by their families, and the wider public who have been let down by them. So let's get this done, and let's make our community much more safer for our children.
Minister Rachel MacClean.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to thank most sincerely my honourable friend, the member for Keighley, for securing this debate, and for all other members for their contributions this evening. I commend him for his perseverance. I commend him for his powerful speech, which cannot have been easy for him to stand up and deliver in this House. But what he has done, Madam Deputy Speaker, is he has given voice to people who have been voiceless for far too long. It is shocking, disgusting and appalling to hear the harrowing testimony that he set out in front of us this evening. No one of us can listen to these accounts without being impacted and horrified. It is truly shocking to hear of the cases set out in the recent review in Bradford. These are instances of the most vulnerable in our society being preyed upon and abused by ruthless criminals, and the review makes for distressing reading. These children experienced multiple traumas, in most cases starting long before they were victims of sexual exploitation at a time when they should have been nurtured and protected. Ages as young as 13. What they went through is almost too horrific to contemplate. I'm sure all members will want to join me in paying tribute to them and all of those victims of sexual abuse and exploitation who have bravely come forward to share their experiences, which cannot be easy, in order to drive change and ensure other children do not go through the same ordeal. I want to thank all others of my honourable friends on all sides of the House who have attended and spoken based on their own experiences in their constituencies and their lived experiences, their considerable expertise in professional fields that they've gained before coming to this place. I want to reassure all victims and survivors that their voices are being heard. We are listening. Across central and local government, law enforcement, the wider criminal justice system and our society as a whole, we have a clear responsibility to do everything in our power to protect children from harm, and we are determined to put victims and survivors at the heart of our approach while relentlessly pursuing the perpetrators of these awful crimes. Since the early 2000s, when several of these horrific cases took place, there have been significant improvements in how local authorities and the police safeguard children in Bradford and across the country, but there is much further to go, and we have heard that firsthand from my honourable friend. So turning to the central argument that he set forward, he has called for an independent inquiry in Bradford, similar to that which took place in Rotherham, and I want to acknowledge the member for Rotherham who's in her place and pay tribute to all the work that she has done and battled determinedly again for many years to give voice to the victims in Rotherham and elsewhere. That independent inquiry in Rotherham was conducted by Alexis J. It was commissioned by Rotherham Borough Council. This government is crystal clear that it is for those local authorities in individual towns and cities, such as Bradford, which are responsible for delivering services, to commission those local inquiries. And my honourable friend has set out clearly, with great clarity, the mechanisms that are available to those local authorities, including in Bradford, to be triggered. The government fully agrees with his remarks. He is right in every word of what he says. The options are available to Bradford Council and those other authorities. And let me say again, in case there is any doubt, they have a responsibility, a moral responsibility, to do the right thing. And I underline this point again, lest there be any doubt. They have a moral responsibility to protect those innocent children. Yes, of course.
Thank you very much. I've been listening to this debate very intently, and I'm very grateful that it is being raised in this House. I want to say, though, that an inquiry isn't the silver bullet. We actually had 2 inquiries in Rotherham. One was commissioned by the government, so that is an option for this government. But it's also, once the inquiry has happened, we need to see the support in place for those survivors to rebuild their lives. We need to see the prosecutions, both of the criminals, but also of anyone that colluded and didn't act in their jobs. And I hope that the Minister will do all in her power to make sure that happens across the country.
I thank the Honourable Lady for her point. She's entirely right that there is a whole system response that is required for those victims in order to rebuild their lives, and I am going to touch on that further in my speech. So I want to recognise the pain and trauma that are endured by those who suffered at the hands of these vile criminals, and understand their need for answers to failures and reassurance that the system that let them down so badly will not do so again. I do welcome Bradford's work to improve their response to child sexual abuse and exploitation by identifying poor practice through the recent review, but I also expect Bradford Council to listen closely to the very real concerns that members have raised in the House this evening, and to take the most thoroughgoing approach to ensuring that all lessons have been learnt and that local partners are doing everything possible to identify child sexual abuse and exploitation and protect children from harm, without letting political and cultural sensitivities deter them. My honourable friend has spoken about the groups committing these crimes in the Bradford area and the need to recognise their common characteristics. The government is clear that child sexual exploitation happens in all areas of the country, and it can take many different forms. We know that it is not exclusive to any single culture, community, race or religion. But community and cultural factors are very relevant to understanding and tackling offending in each local area, as my honourable friend has set out so eloquently. So let me repeat, political or cultural sensitivities must not deter agencies from uncovering and preventing these devastating crimes. Every local authority must ensure children are safeguarded. Every police force has a duty to investigate effectively and thoroughly where they come to harm. Local areas, of course.
I thank the Minister for giving way. Does she agree with me that child sex abuse and child sexual exploitation are different crimes and that the police should not be including them jointly and making assumptions based on the outcomes of doing so? Because the assumption is that if you put them together, you end up with saying it's a white crime. And I had to battle that quite hard, that anybody would say it's not taking into account the cultural factors if you bunch it all together. And they also would say that it's something that just happens at home domestically. So grooming and street grooming is very different from child sexual abuse in a domestic setting. And I think it's very important that that's taken on board.
Well, I thank my honourable friend very much for making that point, which is based on her considerable experience and incredible commitment to the issues that she's been tackling in Telford. And I will be coming on to talk about data and the collection of data and analysis of types of crimes and perpetrators and victims, which she's right to say are at the heart of what we must do to improve our response. And in fact, that is why the Home Office has committed to improving the collection and analysis of data. In March of this year, the Home Secretary introduced a new requirement for police forces to collect ethnicity data for those arrested and held in custody as a result of their suspected involvement and group-based child sexual exploitation. And I think my honourable friend is right to reference the complexity of these crimes and the need for us to fully understand them in order that we may root them out. And what we are doing as a government is we are further supporting local areas to understand and tackle the threat in their areas by funding the prevention programme delivered by the Children's Society. Coordinators in each of the 10 policing regions are delivering tailored interventions based on police intelligence to improve collaboration and help identify specific threats in each region. This programme has led to increased identification of victims. And we are also funding regional child sexual abuse and exploitation analysts in every policing region, as well as a pilot tackling organised exploitation project, which is developing a system to bring together intelligence at a local, regional and national level, improving analysis and tasking so that police across the country can understand and respond more effectively. And nationally, Madam Deputy Speaker, the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse is demanding accountability for past failings and making practical recommendations to ensure that children are given the protection that they need. A report into child sexual exploitation by organised networks is expected this autumn, with a final report in 2022, and we will continue to carefully consider all of the inquiry's recommendations to ensure real and permanent change is delivered in how children are safeguarded. But work is already underway to take action now. Earlier this year, we published a Tackling Child Sexual Abuse strategy, setting out how we're driving action across every part of government, across all agencies and sectors, and with charities, communities, technology companies and society more widely. And in the Beating Crime Plan, we've reaffirmed our strong commitment to delivering increased reporting of these crimes to the police, increased numbers of offenders brought to justice, improved victim care and support, which is a point raised rightly by the Honourable Lady, and an overall fall in the prevalence of these offences. It is vital...
Order.
I beg to move that this House do now adjourn.
The question is that this House do now adjourn. Rachel MacLean.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think I will pick up where my remarks left off, and I was just saying it is vital that more of these complex crimes end in prosecutions and convictions to secure justice for victims. So to support this, we're ensuring that the complexity and sensitivities of child sexual abuse investigations are understood by policing leaders through the College of Policing's training for senior officers on issues of safeguarding and public protection. We fund the police's Vulnerability Knowledge and Practice programme, which identifies and promotes best practice, ensuring that the most effective approaches to investigating these crimes and safeguarding victims are taken up by forces across the country. Of course.
I thank the Minister for giving way. Would she also recognise that where girls are over the age of 16, where they can give consent, sadly in many of these cases they're being gaslighted, they're being forced into this activity, and it's much more difficult for the police to get a prosecution and the Crown Prosecution Service to take action, because sometimes these girls don't see themselves as victims, despite the fact their lives are being controlled by some of these people.
I thank my honourable friend for that intervention, and he's absolutely right to highlight how difficult these crimes are for us to tackle as a society. But it highlights the desperate need that exists that we do tackle them, and that is why we have set out a number of priorities from this government through both the domestic abuse strategy and also the violence against women and girls strategy, backed by considerable funding and resources to ensure that we absolutely can tackle them where they occur. It's vital that we